De Infinite Way, Joel S Goldsmith. De besloten klas die Joel op 13 oktober 1959 in Holland gaf.
Good evening. One thing none of us must ever forget. There is a presence. There is a spirit in man. There is something that is called fourth dimensional consciousness sometimes, spiritual consciousness, Christ consciousness. It is a presence, an actual living presence. In mystical paintings, you may see it sometimes as a cloud formation or as an angel hovering over and close to an individual. This does not mean that there is a physical body or a physical person, but rather that figure of the angel or the cloud is the mystical sense which bears witness to the fact that there is a divine presence. Now, this does not appear in the lives of human beings until such time as they have made that inner contact, until they have attained an actual realization of the presence. Merely declaring that there is a presence or believing that there is one has no more relationship to the actual experience than believing in God. Almost everybody on the face of the globe believes in God, and their belief is of very little value to them and very little benefit. The reason is that a belief in God has no relationship at all to experiencing God. God actually is to be experienced. The Christ is to be experienced. The Spirit of God in man is to be experienced because these actually exist as reality. And after an individual has made contact with their source, has attained actual realization of this presence, then unless they violate their integrity, it will be with them throughout all time. Always remember that there is the possibility of losing it, because it is possible, although it would seem impossible, it is possible for one to violate their integrity, their spiritual integrity, and thereby forfeit that which they have gained. The Master warned about that when he said, "Neither do I condemn thee, but go and sin no more." He indicated that it is possible to go back again to a former state of consciousness. We have that also in the experience of Lot's wife, who turned back to look at the city from which she had fled. In other words, look back at the state of consciousness she had been freed from. Evidently, it still had some pleasures for her, or some profits, and she turned back to look, and in that moment she lost her demonstration. We have in the New Testament the story of Sapphira and Ananias, who had become followers of the Master and evidently very high in the council of the disciples. And after the crucifixion and ascension, the disciples were being persecuted, driven underground as it were, and could not continue their activities of making a living. And so they decided to form a communal society, and each put into it all that they had, so that everyone would equally be taken care of during that period of persecution. And the Bible tells us that Sapphira and her husband came to this meeting and paid into it a sum of money, but Peter discerned that they had held out a part of their wealth. And then Peter said, "You have not done this unto us. You have not done this unto man. You have done this unto God." In other words, unto your own higher integrity, unto your own spiritual righteousness. You have violated, not us. By holding out on us, you do not harm us because we are one with God. But you have held out on your own righteousness. You have betrayed your own righteousness. And we are told in the story that they both dropped dead. In other words, the punishment of their own conscience was more than they could bear. But the essence of these stories is this, that no one should ever believe that because they attain spiritual awareness, because they attain a certain degree of God consciousness, they must not feel that they can afford to be careless or indifferent, because there is always the possibility in one way or another of violating our own inner righteousness or integrity and thereby losing this presence. But aside from that, this presence, once attained, is ours forever, not only on this plane of life, but on all those to come. For let us never forget this: the life we are living is God's life, not ours. It is the life of God, therefore it is eternal. It had no beginning. It coexisted with God from the beginning, as it will coexist with God forever. And therefore, this life of ours will not end either at the grave or at a period of transition. The Master experienced the grave, the tomb, and he rose above it to walk the earth. But he then rose higher in consciousness beyond the earth plane, indicating two things: that we rise from the tomb and live again as humans, eventually to ascend above the level of humans and live our lives in that higher realm or higher consciousness in which the Master found himself and demonstrated for us, to us really, by his own rising. Now, it is possible to rise from the tomb and live this human life without the benefit of the divine presence, although if one leaves this plane with the divine presence, they may be assured that they will awaken from the tomb experience, even if, like the Master, they return to earth, it will still be with that divine presence. Now, there are many forms of life beyond this present experience on earth. There is no one who ever dies or passes beyond our sight who does not live again. But the question is, on what level of existence do they live? And of course we know that there are many who are still living, even though having passed from our sight, but their lives are no more spiritual there than they were here. Their natures are no more spiritual there than they were here. They are just as human, in many cases just as gross, just as materialistic, just as devoid of high ideals as they were here. And then there are others who, as they leave this plane, remain for a while on the same level as that in which they were when they left this plane, and then begin an ascending, even as we here on this plane were in dark humanhood at one time and are now a slight level above that. So they too rise to a higher level of spirituality on the next plane, even though they are still living human lives. But this too is not the end, because our lives really is God's life expressed individually as ours. God the Father living as God the Son. And therefore, as we continue our spiritual progress, we begin to rise and to ascend into higher levels of humanhood, and then, like the Master, ascend above the human level of life into a purely spiritual level of life. Now, there are, even on the other side, those who have advanced in spiritual teachings or occult teachings, and who maintain a contact with people on this earth. These do not reach the level of spiritual consciousness, but a higher level of human consciousness, which is called the occult, or sometimes the psychic. But beyond that is the realm of those who have ascended beyond the realm of human existence, those like the Master, who are far beyond any human communication, and yet whose influence is felt on earth whose influence is actually a part of the influence that is lifting this earth above the age of its present paganism and lack of civilization. We like to speak of our civilization of this day, but the word civilization is only a comparative one. Actually, there is very little of civilization on the face of the globe, and what there is of it is of a very low order. All that we know in all of our countries must, in all fairness, be termed a very low level of civilization. Why must we agree with that? Because we are hardly out of the level of cannibalism. We are still at that level where we slay each other wholesale, where we indulge mass murder wholesale for no higher purpose than profit gain. We like to believe that you and I have nothing to do with that, but as long as our governments do it, you and I do have something to do with it, because you and I constitute our government. And we have no government but ourselves, and we are responsible for those who occupy their positions, for we could change it in 24 hours if our inclinations were strong enough. We have not yet risen above the level of those who send their own nationals, their own children, out into this mass slaughter. And so you might know that we are really on a low level of civilization at this present time, but we are ascending. In the days of my boyhood, no provision was made for working men and working women who were physically and mentally worn out at 50 or 55 and surely at 60, and we shunted them off into poor farms and poor houses that were really a disgrace, a blot upon the face of the earth. The provision that we made for orphans 50, 60 years ago was something disgraceful, and if you could see photographs of those places today, you would hardly believe that our parents and grandparents tolerated it, but they did. We made no provision 50, 60 years ago for those who at no time in their own lifetimes could possibly have saved enough to retire on. All of that has changed, and we acknowledge now a debt to poor orphans. We acknowledge a debt to our workers who have reached an age of retirement without anything to retire on, without our ever having given them enough to retire on. But we acknowledge our debt to them, and we provide incomes for them. Some countries more than others, but it will only be a short time when all countries will provide adequately. Great corporations provide hospitalization for employees, which they never did 50 years ago. I could go on for hours and tell you of the tremendous advance that has been made in our progress towards civilization in only 50 or 60 years. But some of this you already know, and perhaps there are some of you who know more about it even than I do. So I mention it only briefly to show you that we are on an ascending scale of civilization, and that the end is not when we become perfect humans. That is only the beginning. For we step out of good humanhood into our spiritual identity, into our spiritual way of life, and this transcends even good humanhood. As far as the sky is higher than the earth. Now, all of this comes from one particular truth. That is, that beyond the realm of the mind, as far beyond the realm of the mind as the mind is far beyond the realm of matter, far beyond the realm of mind is the realm of spirit or consciousness, the pure consciousness of which this universe is formed and of which it is an expression. This fourth dimensional or Christ consciousness is universal, but it appears in our experience in an individual way. And more particularly, it appears in the way that we have read in Scripture, a presence. The presence that goes before us to make the crooked places straight. The presence that walks beside us as protection, the presence that walks behind us as rear guard. The presence which the Master called the Father within me. The presence which Paul called the Christ. The presence which Gautama experienced as Buddha. In other words, regardless of the name that is used, regardless of the words with which we describe it, it is an actual presence, which is an actual power that appears in the lives of every man, woman, and child who attains this inner contact or touch of the Spirit. The Master said, "The Spirit of the Lord God is upon me, and I am ordained to heal the sick." He would not have been ordained to heal the sick had not this Spirit of God been upon him. Moses, at the point of his illumination, when instructed in his new work, and who felt his own insufficiency as a human being, was told to go and take no thought of your speech at all, for I will put the words in your mouth. That is this presence, this overshadowing presence, this angel of God, this divine activity in consciousness, this Christ. It becomes the life, the intelligence, the activity, the goal of every individual who attains it. No longer does the individual live alone. There is always this inner presence, sometimes spoken of as the still small voice. When the Master heard this voice, it used the word I. I will never leave you nor forsake you. Before Abraham was, I am with you. I will be with you unto the end of the world. I am the bread, the wine, and the water. I am your life eternal. I will never leave you. I am the resurrection. And the psalmist said, if I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for this presence is with me. Then this presence enables the individual who attains the experience to relax, completely relax, and say with Paul, I live, yet not I. Christ liveth my life. Saroyan, the modern writer, says, I am not living my life. God lives my life, and I go along for the ride. Everyone who attains this fourth dimensional consciousness realizes it either as God with us, Emmanuel, God with us, or as the Christ or the Buddha or the presence or the angel or the Spirit of God. But by whatever name we call it, it is actually a living presence which is our intelligence, so that we need not lean unto our own understanding. We need only to live in an attitude of listening inwardly, not outwardly. Inwardly, keep a corner for listening, and then it gives us whatever wisdom is necessary for the experience of every day, whether it is driving the car, planning a business or a home, or even furnishing one. But it becomes the wisdom that we express, or that expresses itself through us. He performeth that which is given me to do. He perfecteth that which concerneth me. The only ones, you see, who can say that are those who actually feel that there is a he, or an it, a something which does perform that which is given me to do, that puts the words in my mouth when they should be spoken, that keeps a silence when the lips should be still. Always it has been believed that such experiences are exceptional only to a few in each generation, and indeed it would seem that that has been so. The reason, of course, has been that the way has been lost to perpetuate this experience in human life. While it never existed at all in the Western world, it has for centuries been known in the Eastern world, where a teacher, a spiritual teacher or master, could, by association with students, raise some of them at least to that same level of spiritual awareness. And as a matter of fact, that is how the line of spiritual teachers has been perpetuated in India, in Japan, in other countries where there is a line of spiritual masters coming down through the ages. The master, working with his students, finds among them those who are prepared to be lifted into that consciousness where they too experience this presence, and then they send those out as teachers and eventually as masters. This has never been known in the West, because from the very inception of religious teaching after the days of the Hebrew masters, it would seem that all spiritual teaching stopped and religious teaching became merely the performing of rituals, rites, and modes of worship, and teaching in the seminaries merely the doctrines, the creeds, and what we would call the letter of truth. With the revival, no, not revival, with the origin of the metaphysical world, that which came into being originally through Christian Science, this idea and practice of one individual receiving illumination or spiritual awareness through another was for the first time given to the Western world. And we have had the experience of some of the students of our earliest teachers who received direct inspiration and illumination from their teacher and then went out and carried on the work in the world. As a matter of fact, every successful metaphysical practitioner, more especially those who have been spiritually touched, every one of those had to receive some measure of spiritual light from their teacher or from their teaching in order that they might become a practitioner, because there is nothing human about the spiritual practice. And no human being, by purely human knowledge, could carry on for a very long time a spiritual, metaphysical, healing practice. It is possible to learn the statements of truth, and to make affirmations and denials, and for a short while to have a very brief success, but it rarely goes beyond 2, 3, or 4 years. And then those who have not attained something higher than a human knowledge of truth fall by the wayside and either return to their former way of life, their housewifely duties in the case of women, or office duties, back to business for the men. because it is not possible to maintain a successful metaphysical practice through the letter of truth alone, through a human knowledge of truth, regardless of how profound that knowledge may be. In order to heal successfully, continuously, progressively, it is necessary that an individual go beyond knowing the statements of truth to the attaining of a spiritual touch, to the attaining of this fourth dimensional consciousness, to the attaining of the realization of the presence of which I've spoken. In my 30 years in this work, I have met many, many of those who have survived 30 years, and some more, successfully as healers. And in every case, they are people who have been touched by this Spirit, who have realized the presence, and who are not functioning purely from the level of human good or humanly knowing the truth. Now, two things are necessary to take a student above the level of being merely a good human being who knows statements of truth or principles of truth. Nor am I indicating that everyone is to become a practitioner or even a teacher of truth. No, no, no. Do not misunderstand me. But everyone on this path must have as their goal being lifted above this purely human way of living without the benefit of this fourth wise man, this other presence, this divine self. Then it makes no difference whether one wishes to be a musician, an artist, a sculptor, a businessman, professional man. As long as they are living in the conscious awareness of this divine presence, they will not only be better and more successful in the line of work, art, profession they follow, but what is much more important than their success, they will have peace, happiness, abundance, inner contentment, rightful companionship, harmonious human relationships, and all of these they will attain not by virtue of might or power, but by virtue of my peace or my presence or my spirit. Life should not be lived by might nor by power, but by the Spirit of God. Now we know in this age that this is possible to you and to me. This is not necessarily possible to every human being on the face of the globe at this moment. This may not be possible to your children, or to all of your children or grandchildren. It may not be possible to your husband or wife. It may not be possible to your parent, nor to my brother or sister, because it is possible only to those who have been led by some mysterious way they know not of, to seek the spiritual path. And be assured of this: in this present age, only a few have been led to such a path. If I believed for a moment that there were 500 people in The Hague or Amsterdam ready to hear this message, I would advertise in the newspapers and hire a theater. So much would I love to have 500 know this message and be able to accept it. But this I have learned in my life: those who are ready for what I have to say are led to me. We need no advertising. We need no public display. We need only sit quietly in a hotel room. And all of those necessary to this experience, all of those ready to hear, will be led to me. And so it is that every teacher who comes to The Hague or to Amsterdam, who has a message, a God-given message, one that has been entrusted to them to deliver to the world, be assured of this: each one of them will draw unto themselves their own. How well do I remember that on my first trip to Europe after the war, I paid a visit to Amsterdam. And that might seem strange to you, because I did not know a living soul in Amsterdam or in The Hague or in any other part of Holland. And yet I came into Amsterdam, registered at a hotel, and remained there quietly and peacefully alone for 3 days. Saw no one, merely walked out on the street, up and down the business streets, to a park, back to meals, at night to bed, completely alone. Why was I there? I don't think it makes sense, really. The only reason I could give myself was that my grandfather came from Amsterdam 100 years ago. That's a very poor excuse to come back and walk its streets, I know. But that was my excuse, the only excuse that I had. And I sought no one, and certainly didn't try to convert anyone to the infinite way. After 3 days, I felt that whatever I came for had been accomplished, and I left. And please believe me when I tell you that 2 weeks later, Brother Manda said to me, "Have you ever been to Holland?" I was just over there for a little visit in Amsterdam. "Well, did you work there?" "No." "Oh, well, you must let me tell you where to go." And he sent me here to this house. And I had only met him that day. Now, that all seems coincidental, doesn't it? Surely you know that there was nothing coincidental about it, because there are in this room, within hearing of my voice, there are those who have been deeply blessed by my having come here. Therefore, it must have been for a purpose, and I didn't know them, and they couldn't know me. And so, behind the scenes, this presence was operating to bring us together. If you ever benefit from the message of the infinite way, try to remember in what a miraculous way you were brought to it. And in what a miraculous way I was brought to you without a human footstep, without planning it that way, without desiring it that way, without wanting to push myself upon you or even this message. And yet because God, the divine, wanted it to reach you, because it was in the spiritual plan for it to be presented here, it brought about all that has happened in these 6 years. This is divine intervention, but it can only happen for 2 reasons. One is that I am always led by this Spirit that placed me in this work 30 years ago. I am always led by a guiding influence that takes me where I should be and provides even the means for me to reach there. And the second reason is that every time that you have had a thought, an impersonal thought, an unselfish thought about, I would like to know God, or I would like to know truth, or I am searching for God, or I am searching for truth, you were picked up by a divine presence and led. And it would lead you from one teaching to another until you find your own. Just as even if this infinite way isn't your message, then your leading has brought you here merely to carry you to this point, but will continue to carry you until you do reach that message which is particularly for you. Always remember that there is not now, never has been, and never will be one message for all people, because we are all at different levels of consciousness, and we all require different things at different times. If we who are here are free of any need of organizational activity or rules given by man to follow, it is only because at some time or other we needed organizational activity and direction and protection and had it, and were given the grace to go beyond it. In other words, because we have completed school, please do not let us burn down the schoolhouse. If we have gone beyond the need of an organizational church or teaching, let us please not burn down those that exist, but let us leave them for those who, like ourselves, needed them, and for whom they provide stepping stones, even as you may be led from the infinite way to some other teaching. But remember this, the fact that you are in this room this week bears witness to the fact that a spiritual influence is guiding you, that you are prepared for, those who have not yet had it, you are prepared for a spiritual experience and this inner contact, and you are on the path and you will receive it, whether or not you receive it here with me, whether or not you receive it on this trip or the next, whether or not you are merely being prepared for someone else to complete the work, all of that makes no difference. The fact is that your presence here is a testimony to the fact that you have been led here by the Spirit, because you weren't sent for, you weren't advertised for, you weren't promised things if you attended. Therefore, you have come only under some divine guidance, and this is your place at this particular moment. Now, if the thousands outside these doors in The Hague or Amsterdam or neighboring towns had been ready for this experience, they would be here even if we had to tear the building down and put the tent up to hold them. I don't want to hurt your house, really.
That will be a big one.
Yes, there is a spiritual influence that guides the action and conduct and provides the words, the means, the transportation, everything necessary to carry those into the world who have attained a message and who have attained the Spirit of God and who live by it and through it. And so it is that you could not be here but for the fact that in some degree the presence of God is with you, the presence of the Christ is with you, leading you and directing you, but you now have an important work to do, and that is to pay closer attention to your inner guidance and inner light, remembering you should never make a move from the moment you waken it in the morning until you go to sleep at night without a momentary pause to listen, at least to create the vacuum into which the Spirit can come and guide, lead, direct, support, maintain, sustain. It is you who must be alert and develop the habit of saying, "Speak, Lord, thy servant heareth. I will listen for thy voice. I will listen for thy voice. I am listening for thy voice. I of my own self can do nothing. The Father within me doeth the works. Whatsoever things the Father doeth, I do. But only because of a listening ear. Only because the Master went away for periods of 40 days. Only because he took time out morning, noon, and night to go up on a rooftop, watch the stars, walk out on the sands of the desert, down by the seashore. Always in inner contemplation of this Spirit of God that dwells within each of us, closer than breathing, nearer than hands and feet. Now, in our work, we have learned how we may help ourselves to attain this conscious awareness of the presence of God, because we know that it is only done through spiritual consciousness and not through the human mind. But the question is, how do we break through the human mind and attain the state of spiritual consciousness that can be aware of this Spirit of God within us? This is our way in the message of the infinite way. Last night we took up the subject of practicing the presence of God as a conscious thinking practice. and we took up contemplative meditation as a conscious activity of the human mind. Now, of course, because you heard this last night is not sufficient to enable you to at once demonstrate this. It is for this reason that we are blessed in this generation with these tape recorders, because you will have these tapes for study. You will have access to them in proportion to your own desire. No one can withhold them from you, and no one wants to. Everyone connected with this activity joys at the idea that there are students who really want to hear them, want to study them, want them repeated until the student has them so deeply embedded within their consciousness that they no longer need to hear them. Therefore, you have last night's tape for study and for practice. And now tonight we will take another step forward in spiritualizing consciousness so that we may be a transparency through which we become aware of that which already is the presence of God hovering around our shoulders. Our next practice is this. Whenever you become aware of anything that might be in the nature of a problem, whether it concerns you or anyone else, or whether it concerns the human world or animal world, if this appearance, problem, reaches your consciousness, if you see it or hear it, you will be alert, and instantly, at the very instant that this problem or appearance touches your consciousness, in that very instant, whether it appears as a person or as a condition, you will realize only the grace of God is functioning here. Only the grace of God is operating here. Only the grace of God is taking place. And this appearance, or these appearances, regardless of the name or nature, has no law of God to create it or to maintain it. Therefore, it is the arm of flesh and must drop of its own nothingness. When you have done that, you have done all that is necessary at that moment. You can then go on and live your life, think your thoughts, do your work, whatever is next for you at hand. But you may not put it aside and say, I will give this a treatment tonight, or I will treat about this an hour from now. No treatment dare be put off 1 second after it has touched your consciousness. Any treatment not given instantaneously may involve weeks, months, or years of work before the situation can be met, because once you have accepted it, you have it. Now you have to get rid of it. And it is not as easy to get rid of as it is to meet at the point of witnessing it. Let us put it this way. You are walking along the street, and you may be very busily engaged in conversation with someone, but here comes a drunken person, or one who seems to be drunk. Actually, they may be very, very sick, and merely appearing as drunk. But as far as you're concerned, it really makes no difference whether they are sick or whether they are drunk. You have a function to perform at that moment which entails your stopping that conversation, regardless of how interesting or important it may seem to be. And now, in this instant, you realize only the grace of God is operating here. And this appearance, regardless of its name or nature, has no law of God to maintain it or sustain it. Now, you may be in your home, and you may witness an illness or bad disposition, or hear a story of lack or limitation, or misconduct. And you may not be called upon to say anything humanly, or to take any human part in the picture, but be assured of this: you dare not pass by on the other side of the road.